Okay, once again, welcome to the Unshakable Foundation meeting of Cocaine Anonymous. This is a main share meeting, and today it's with great pleasure, so much gratitude, that I welcome Herb K. from California, who's come to share around the joy of living, steps 10 to 12, for around 40 minutes, after which we'll open up for about 15 minutes of Q&A. So Herb, thank you so much for coming, and with that, it's over to you.
My name is Herb, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm so glad that you have the format that you have, the information, and thank you for articulating it so clearly, as if, in fact, people might be listening and paying attention, because that was really an important piece that you read. I'm an alcoholic. I did not know that. I'm not here to tell my story, although my story will seep out as I share with you around a topic that is my current focus for my current life and my current experience, and that's the joy of living. Each year in the fall, I take a look at my life, and I look forward to what the next year might bring and what might be an invitation from the God of my not understanding to enhance my life and to contribute to the people around me. Now, I never used to think that way, of course. My sobriety date is February 21st, 1984. Yes. Longer than most of you have been alive. I'll be 84 next month. 84 years old. I'm 40 years sober. It's an amazing journey. It's just been an amazing journey. And the reason I'm focused on the joy of living, because that's been the gift of my commitment and activity in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know some stuff now because I'm one of my step guides early on took me through the steps. And he refers to people like me, perhaps people like you, as a mad dog seeker, the highest of compliments. Meaning that we have this deep, 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 deep thirst and hunger. Never satisfied. I mean, cocaine was an attempt at one of the solutions. Drugs of a variety of kind is an attempt at one of the solutions. Alcohol was my attempt at the solution. Previous to that, I went into a monastery to study to be a Catholic priest for 7 years. I mean, I'm a serious person about this thirst and hunger that I have that I didn't know was a spiritual thirst. That's my terminology for it. If you have any resistance to the word spirit, I invite you to just have an open mind and open heart. You don't need to. And the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is my textbook, it's my Rosetta Stone for knowing how to live life. I knew none of that at the time, of course. I came out of the monastery in 1964 and I hung up my black robe, and after 7 years of meditation, 7 years of silence, I didn't meditate again for another 25 years. Well, what is that? That's a person who puts on a robe and is a monk, and monks meditate, takes off a robe, therefore is not a monk, therefore doesn't meditate. I don't know whether you follow the lack of logic there, but that was, in fact, my perception and my experience. A story for a different day. I found sobriety, and then I found Alcoholics Anonymous in that order. That's why your opening and your preface and your inclusiveness was so impressive to me. Because that's the nature of the 12-step culture as I understand it and have experienced it. Bill said it very clearly. Bill Wilson, the author of the big book, he published the book in April of 1939. He was 4 or 5 years sober at the time, April of 1939. And if you look at your book, it contains the preface to the first edition. All of the AA books contain the preface to the first edition. Now, most of us, has been my experience, don't read the prefaces and the forewords. It's a shame. It's a lot of wonderful information in there. But the preface to the first edition, in the very first paragraph, and the last line said, Bill had this wonderful prophetic vision. Not that he knew it. I think he wrote in the big book more than he actually knew. Because we've been unpacking it ever since to find the depth and the breadth of the psychology and the spiritual nuance that's there. But in that paragraph, the first paragraph of the first preface of the very first edition, April of 1939, he says, and besides, our way of living may have its advantages for all. You see, that's what I'm talking about today, or will in a minute if I can get to it. And that is our way of life. Our way of living may have its advantages for all. Now, back in the day, he wrote the book for alcoholics because that was his focus and experience. He had no idea that the Al-Anons would pick it up in 1951 and that a variety of people with addiction problems would pick it up after that. Addiction from my standpoint, and I'm not a trained anything, I'm not a certified anything, I'm not a degreed anything. But I read those people that are. And addiction, from my standpoint, is repetitive behavior over which I have no control. Behavior, repetitive, no control, no choice. We hear the word powerless so often that we become brain dead to it. No, seriously, listen to your group pray the serenity prayer. Blah, 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 blah. Very few people giving it any thought at all or any emphasis at all and blah, blah. And they don't even know by the end of it that the group has prayed or they have prayed. Mostly. I don't judge. I evaluate. Yeah, that's my cover story. So, going back to the comment, if you have any problem with the word spirit or God or power or any of the somewhat religious and or spiritual terminology, try to have an open mind and open heart about it because it doesn't matter. Bill Wilson's attitude in the big book is all-inclusive. He uses that word. Never exclusive. Never exclusive. Always inclusive. And the way you represented your group here as open to all, not just cocaine, but people with addiction. That's the work that I do. But it's actually beyond that. The experience that I've had, it's actually beyond that. On February 20th, 1984, the hospital in which my wife was hospitalized for her alcoholism asked me to stop drinking to support her recovery. I wasn't there for me, I was there for her. I was there to support her recovery. I was willing to say, yeah, I'll stop drinking for the next 90 days to support her recovery. I haven't had a drink or an inclination for a drink since. I didn't go to AA for another 3 months. And I only went there because the hospital again asked me to do an autobiography of my relationship with drinking. If you haven't done that, I don't care how long you've been in the program or any program at all or dealing with any disturbance in your life about addiction at all. If you haven't done that, I really recommend it. It was life-changing for me. It was my very first awakening. I won't use the term spiritual awakening. I don't need to. It was my very first awakening. I did not know, as Gurdjieff said, a Russian philosopher, I was asleep dreaming that I was awake. Brilliant phrases like that just capture my attention. I was asleep dreaming that I was awake. Quite frankly, when I went into therapy with a therapist after I got sober, I discovered that I wasn't the Renaissance man that I thought I was, because I had begun to do a fourth step and I had begun to thaw out and I had begun to be honest with myself and with others. And I wasn't the Renaissance man that I thought I was. I was a Neanderthal. And I began to wake up. And I began to have the curtains part. And I began to have that awakening that the big book promises as the result of step 12. So then I went to AA after about 3 months. And I still go to that group, my very first group, as my home group. I do go to 1 or 2 meetings a week, just to stay civilized. Not because I necessarily need it, but I need the community. It's very apparent I need the community. One of my teachers said, there are 3 things that most human beings, especially those who are conscious and on a spiritual path, need. 1 is a path. We're fortunate to have the 12 steps. 1 is a teacher. We're fortunate to have what we call sponsors. I call them step guides. That's the essence of it, and that's my experience with it. And we have a community. That's our fellowship, which we experience when we go to meetings of 12-step culture. At first, when I did the steps and began helping other people, I was asked to do a group of helping other people going through the steps. And it was exclusive to AA because that was my experience. But then the drug addicts asked if they could come in prayer and some good advice from some enlightened AA people. They said, well, why don't you try it? Based on that preface to the first edition, our way of living may have its advantages for all. And it worked, of course, because the 12-step methodology is not about addiction, actually. It's certainly not about alcohol. It's about human nature. It's about unmanageability. That's really the problem. That's been my focus since I was sober 10 years. Not before that. My sobriety and my journey has been one of thawing out over a long period of time. 10 years, 12 years, actually 12 years, 4 different sponsors and step guides. My sponsor first took me through the steps out of the book in a very clumsy, awkward, clunky way because he didn't know what he was doing, but it was good enough. I stayed around. He stayed around. And then at 5 years of sobriety, I haven't had a break-in commercial for a long time. So there we go. And this man was very different. I didn't know who he was, but he shared in a different way. His words were wise. I wouldn't have listened to him had they not been. But his eyes had a bright light in it. Now, did I know this or was I aware of it at the time? Absolutely not. Only in retrospect do I know most anything, and certainly this experience. But the tone in his voice, the tone, the timbre in his voice captured me like a magnet pointing north. And he had something that I'd never heard of, and he talked about the big book as a textbook that had precise directions as to how to do the steps and apply them to your personal life and to have a spiritual awakening, which meant, by his standard, because he had read and understood and experienced Appendix 2, a change in the way we think and feel and behave, and it's done to us, not by us, but not without us. And after the meeting, I asked him his name and introduced myself and my background, and we sat for an hour. And he's the one that said to me, 5 years sober, Herb, you have a lot of information, but you have very little transformation. And he put his arms around his head for the information and his arms around the heart for the transformation. And he said, you have a lot of academic knowledge, but it's never been processed through your heart to your feet. And you have not changed. He wasn't being critical. He was telling me the truth. And for some reason, I was able to hear it and ask for his help. That's why I call him and other people like him a step guide. He never became my sponsor. We worked for a year. He was like a project manager. He agreed to take me through the steps out of the big book, one page at a time, one step at a time. He recommended I use a dictionary as the best supplement to navigating the vocabulary of the 1930s and 40s that Bill wrote the big book in, which I did. And in the very first step, I had the beginnings of an awakening because I understood why I was an alcoholic. Up till then, 5 years sober, I thought I was an alcoholic because of the drama and the story and all the trauma. And I'm not an alcoholic because of trauma and drama and story. I'm not an alcoholic because of the way I think and feel and behave. I'm an alcoholic for two reasons I came to find over the next 5 years as I journeyed through the steps 2 different times with 2 different people. I'm a slow learner and I need different teachers at different times as my consciousness improves. That first time I became aware of the doctor's opinion. I'm an addict because when I start, I cannot stop. Later on, 3 years later, it became apparent to me based on the big book and my experience with the big book that I'm an addict because of a second reason. Once I stop, I cannot stay stopped. And that addiction's not the problem I found out at 10 years of sobriety. Every one of us is here because of addiction. But we won't stay here because of abstinence. Because we will experience sober serial suffering on plain abstinence. Because our problem is not addiction and abstinence. Our problem is unmanageability, that second half of the first step. Again, clueless until I was 10 years sober. Clueless until I went through the work the third time with a third step guide. And this time it took 2 years. A very contemplative process. I wasn't being driven by any hot poker. The first time, driven through the steps in my clunky way by my sponsor and my will, my need, my willingness, my somehow desire to be part of the AA community in my first year. The second time at 5 years because of a job problem, which was resolved. I quit. The third time going through the steps at 7, 8 years of sobriety, I had another hot poker. I was in a 25-year marriage and wanted a divorce. At the end of that process, which only took 6 months because I was in a hurry, I concluded again that I was the problem. And when she died 6 years ago, we were married 52 years. Good friends. Decent marriage. But at 10 years of sobriety, I met a man who quoted Gurdjieff like I just did. And I'd never heard about the Gurdjieff and or this man before. And I asked him to help me, and it took 2 years to go through the steps with him guiding me. He never became my sponsor. I never actually wanted anything he had. But he was a fabulous teacher. He had some experience that he was able to precipitate in me because he knew how to ask me to ask myself questions, to turn statements in the big book into questions, to crack open those sentences in the big book that are seeds in there that can flower into an awakening if we really understand what the sentences are saying and what the experience is contained behind the knowledge. And I found out about unmanageability, and that's the heart of the theme of the joy of living. I didn't know that I didn't know, and I couldn't see that I didn't see, and that's been my mantra from the beginning, 1984. And it continues today. But once I saw unmanageability as Bill saw it, the spiritual malady or the human malady, that the steps will in fact address the first 9 addressing the addiction and promising neutrality. Check page 84. That's the word Bill uses on page 84 as the promise of those first 9 steps at the conclusion of step 9. He said, we are placed here, the grace. We are placed in a position of neutrality. Not a moment sooner than by finishing the 9th step. But then he warns us because he knew, or at least he wrote more than he knew, as I understand it today, about unmanageability, the spiritual malady, the human condition, unmanageability. What does it mean? Check page 62. Selfishness, self-centeredness is the root. Check page 52. Those bedevilments in that second paragraph that describe behaviorally unmanageability. Read the bedevilments with the personal pronoun present tense, I am. Personal pronoun, I. Present tense, am. Read the whole paragraph of the bedevilments. Present tense, personal pronoun. I had a spiritual experience doing that assignment at 11 years of sobriety during this 2-year journey I had with this man, who basically put the capstone on my spiritual awakening, the promise of the 12th step having had as the result. Which then prepared me for step 2 and 3. Up till then, because of my monastic background and my education in philosophy and psychology, I read chapter 4 as if it had been written for kindergartners, and I kind of discarded it. Now I see it's brilliant, the best theology I've ever encountered. The best theology I've ever encountered. Chapter 4. And then chapter 5, of course, the best psychology I've ever encountered. Step 2, a choice about faith. God is or God isn't, power is or power isn't. There's a light in the universe that's deep inside of me, and I choose to believe that. And with step 3, I make a decision to have a relationship with that light in me and around me. To be in alignment with the flow of reality, to be in alignment with the flow of energy in the universe, to quit fighting everything and everyone, to quit resisting reality, to accept reality, to acknowledge reality, to adjust to reality. Reality will never adjust to me, and that was the conclusion of that 12-year journey through the steps. Progressively, not all at once, just tiny little pieces over time. But then really understanding Bill's caveat, Bill's yellow flag that he puts up on page 84, 85. Placed in a position of neutrality, wonderful promise for addiction. But he says we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. We can't rest on our laurels. We can't be complacent about yesterday's work. We need, he says, in those 2 pages, very dense pages, almost every word needs to be unpacked and experienced. Pages 84 and 85. The transition from step 9, the program of recovery, to the program of living, steps 10, 11, and 12. Bill calls it our way of life. And he just warns us, we're not cured. What does that mean? I wrote an article on the best kept secrets in the rooms. What is unmanageability? Really, seriously, what does it mean? Bill doesn't give us the definition in the clearest of terms. He does give it to us clearly, but I needed a guide to shine the light of his knowledge and experience on the big book so that I could read it in the light of his experience and have my own experience. Unmanageability. My will is free, but not with regard to addiction and not with regard to me. My free will is not free with regard to addiction, no choice, powerless. My free will is not free with regard to me. My choice is about myself. My free will is not free. It will always choose me. It's a survival mechanism. I'm not diminishing, denigrating it. Hopefully I'm explaining it. It's a survival mechanism. Bill calls it in the 12 and 12, instincts gone awry. The instinct for survival at the brainstem level. Instinct. At the emotional limbic system level, that second brain. Survival. Fight, flight, and freeze. Resentment, fear, and dishonesty. That's the structure of the fourth step in the big book, as I've understood it and experienced it. And he says on page 62 at the end of that second paragraph, and we can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power, which includes the steps. It certainly includes the 12-step program. What does powerless mean? No choice. Oh, no choice. Powerless with regard to addiction. But how about this? No choice. Powerless over our managing our lives. And the invitation and the promise from my standpoint and my experience and interpretation of the material in the big book is for me to manage my life. It's an invitation for me to manage my life. I hear it in the rooms and I shudder because of the ignorance that it betrays and the pain and suffering that it will inevitably produce when people say, oh, let God manage your life. It's counter psychology, it's counter common sense, and it's counter healthy living. God does not manage my life. And I do not invite God to manage my life. I have a vital relationship with a God of my not understanding. It's something that I experienced in that fourth journey through the steps in 1994, 1996, those 2 years. I use the term mystery. I don't know what it is, but I made a decision that it is, step 2. And in step 3, I made that decision to take the actions that will give me a relationship with that mystery. It's all very invisible, immaterial. There's no certitude, there's no feeling. There's behavior. I made a choice that it is. And I live my life as if it is. And the only way I ever get any feedback is when I look back over my shoulder. Is my life working or not? Is my life producing what I hope to be the outcome? Joy and happiness. And I was able finally in that fourth journey through the steps to appreciate not cured. Oh, I have a will that will always choose me. So during the day in step 10, I need to be conscious of when I'm disturbed. Bill nails it in the 12 and 12. Thank God for that commentary. If you haven't read step 10 in the 12 and 12, the Alcoholics Anonymous 12 and 12, it's brilliant. It's a wonderful description of emotional sobriety. I consider step 10 the tool of emotional sobriety. And it's about staying in alignment with life, staying in alignment with reality as it's emerging. And when I'm disturbed, I know I'm out of alignment with reality. I'm out of alignment with life. I'm out of alignment with flow. Some people call it God's will. I don't believe in God's will. I wrote a meditation on it. It's a commentary for a different day, not right now, but maybe I'm piquing your interest. I've said some things that perhaps are controversial, and I hope they are to you, because it'll create some conversation and maybe some new knowledge and maybe some new awareness and maybe some new experience. I hope that's my prayer. Unmanageability. I'm invited to manage my life. Not on my own power, though, because that's what step 11 is all about. Step 11, I sit in the presence of power every day, and I ask for guidance. That's the word Bill used, not in the big book, unfortunately, but in his language, in his talks about the Oxford group, because the Oxford group used the predecessor group to the development of Alcoholics Anonymous. The Oxford group, it was a Christian group. It was an evangelical group. It had no interest in alcoholics or alcoholism. They didn't like alcoholics. Fortunately, in a story for a different day, there was an alcoholic who found his way into, at the direction of Carl Jung, into the Oxford group, Roland Hazard. And Roland never joined AA, but he got connected to Ebby Thatcher to share with Ebby what he had done, Roland Hazard, to become sober and free from his addiction of alcohol. And Ebby Thatcher got sober and got free through the 6 steps of the Oxford group and carried the message to Bill Wilson. And Bill Wilson carried that message to Dr. Bob. The total point of the 12th step. Proactive carrying the message, or at least trying to carry the message. And here's something that may not be very familiar to some of you. Dr. Bob was already in the Oxford group. 2.5 years he had been going to meetings every week, the Oxford group meetings. There was no AA. He was going to Oxford group meetings in Akron, Ohio every week, praying, confessing, discussing, and going home every week for 2.5 years and getting drunk. Because he thought it was a knowledge issue and a willpower issue. And Bill shows up. Again, a story that has a lot of richness to it that I'm not going to take the time to share right now. And he shares with him his experience of addiction and alcohol. And Bob heard it for the very first time, that he was powerless and had no choice and needed to connect to that God of his understanding in a very, very different way. And once Bob was able to set aside his religious beliefs and have the experience of his alcoholism condition and behavior in history, he was able to marry the two and have an awakening finally after one relapse until he died in 1950. But Bill says very clearly on those 2 pages, 84, 85, he calls it our way of living. That we need to grow in understanding and effectiveness, and that's what step 12 is all about. Helping other people. Now, it does say in the big book in step 12, helping alcoholics. I'm assuming in your literature it says helping addicts. But Bill was very clear in the preface to the first edition, it's helping anybody. Our way of living may have its advantages for all. And in fact, the writing, if you look at the pre-publication manuscript of the big book, it had step 12 reading like this. Having had a spiritual experience as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others especially alcoholics. Now, fortunately, that didn't get into the final version because we need singleness of purpose. I'm a very big believer on the traditions of singleness of purpose. But it does reveal the outlook and attitude and perspective of those original 100 people that had the group conscience development of the big book to its final place. Carry the message to others, especially alcoholics. And so through my workshops, they have expanded to be exactly what your spirit is here in your particular group. And that is, we use the 12 steps to have a spiritual awakening, and y'all are welcome. Y'all are welcome. Whatever addiction you have, or no addiction at all, I'm assuming, if you want to have a spiritual awakening, if you want to reduce the pain in your life, if you want to eliminate the suffering of your life, if you want to not be disturbed most of the time and you want to be in alignment with reality, if you want to live happy, joyous, and free, that's not a throwaway line. Happy, joyous, and free. We have a way of life that guarantees it. No. Guarantees it. Because it guarantees us an ability to have a relationship with life, with God as I don't understand it, with higher power, with mystery, with reality. I can be in a relationship with life. I can be in a relationship with myself. I can be in relationship with other people. I can be in a relationship with reality most of the time. And when I'm in that flow, my life works. Doesn't matter what you call it. Doesn't matter the words that you use. It doesn't matter the approach or the amount of understanding and or effort that goes into it. No, I mean that. I have a lot of perfectionists. I'm going to end with this. I have a lot of perfectionists in my workshop, probably over half. Very large workshops. Over half of the people are perfectionists from all walks of addiction, every culture there is, every program there is. About half of them are perfectionists, meaning in an unhealthy relationship with reality. And I'm really, in the last 3 years, been really stressing, whatever we do, as long as we do, whatever we do is good enough. Even though we believe firmly it's not good enough, it is good enough. Whatever we do, notice I'm saying, not think, not feel, not know. Whatever we do with the intention of improving in whatever way we want to improve will lead us eventually, because the universe is a very, very, very positive force. And it will lead us forward if we lean into it. That's my experience. I can say today, I live in a joy of living. Is my life problem-free? Of course not. But I have the tools and the community and the path and the support to be able to navigate it. As I say, life is filled with speed bumps, but I've got great shock absorbers. And so, maybe that's helped. That's my commentary today, at least. Catch me tomorrow. I'll have a different take on it. Thanks.
Lane, come on in.
Hiya everybody, thank you for the meeting, thank you for everybody doing service, and Herb, thank you very much for your share. I liked the bit when you started off with like cocaine was your solution to life, and it got me thinking that was the solution to my life. If anything I had to deal with in my life was that I didn't like or that hurt me, cocaine was the solution. But I do have a question for you, and it's something that I feel like I'm doing at the moment. In your early stages of your recovery, did you find yourself like trying too hard to work a perfect program? And if you did, was there anything that you changed or you did to not do that? Because I feel me at the moment doing that, what I'm doing is I'm struggling to give myself a break, and I was just wondering if it was anything you had experienced.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Thanks, Blaine. Yes, I had the experience because I was such a narcissist and egocentric, really Neanderthal, as I mentioned. I didn't see that my perception was delusional, and I thought because I went to a lot of meetings that's what made me sober, kept me sober. And so I used to resonate with meeting makers make it. But then 5 years later, I did the steps and I got very righteous. I didn't know I was righteous. I just thought I was right. And I said, anybody who doesn't do the steps out of the big book and the precise way that I had done them they don't know what they're doing. And of course, at least I hope that anybody that has an authentic spiritual awakening will see the arrogance of that pretty soon. And it was after 3 or 4 months that I began to reflect that my attitude wasn't very helpful. And I calmed down on that sort of evangelical attitude I had about the steps. And then years later, and that's where I'm at today, I met some people who had wonderful spiritual awakenings and wonderful productive lives. But after a while, 20 years, when I met them again, there were 4 of them. Stories again for a different day, but the 2 were not sober. And one had a very obvious bad divorce and catastrophic consequences, and the other had a bad financial environment. So there were 4 people who had absolutely, their lives had fallen apart. And I thought, it's not meetings and it's not steps. It's my relationship with God and my accountability to somebody, whether you call it a sponsor or a step guide or a companion or a friend or a therapist, it doesn't matter. So the answer to your question, long answer, is yes, I regularly found that I had deceived myself, but this program, if intentionally and diligently, consistently sort of worked, will bring you to the truth over time. Does that help?
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks for your question, Blaine. Next up, Rach, come on in.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rach. I'm a grateful recovered addict. Great to be here. Thanks to everyone for doing service. And thanks so much, Herb. I really, really appreciate your shares. I've heard quite a few of them on audio. And to be honest, they always spin my head out a little bit. Because you're like 40 years into your recovery and I'm like 4, and I really appreciated how you said that your consciousness expands and this controversial element of what you were talking about. And I was like, I'm so confused when you were talking about, God not running your life and not giving yourself to God. And I was like, I just want to ask you to elaborate on that a little bit, because this is what I'm trying to get me out of the way, and I'm trying to turn to this higher power. So I just wanted to be brave and say I didn't quite understand that bit. Could you elaborate, please?
Well, and I'm glad you picked it up, because now I'm remembering how I may have gotten distracted from the initial statement I made and not brought it to conclusion, so that, in fact, you would understand what I meant by that. So I'm forever grateful to you for, and especially this recording, and that is, I sit in the presence of power every morning. God is my managing partner. Partnership with God. Read page 75 in the promises after step 5. It says, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. That's my image of my relationship with God as I don't understand it. Partnership. God's the managing partner, and I ask for advice. But I have the responsibility, number 1, to ask, number 2, to listen, number 3, to implement. And then to course correct, step 10, when in fact I find myself disturbed again, which is, of course, the spot check inventory that Bill is asking us to do on a 24/7 basis. So that's what I meant by that I'm in a relationship with God, the mystery, for guidance, very much like my GPS. I listen to the directions that I get, but I'm responsible to drive the car in order to get where I want to get.
Great question. Thank you, Rach. Next up, Isaac, come on in.
Hey everyone, I'm Isaac, recovered addict. Thank you everyone doing service on the meeting tonight. Herb, thank you so much for your share. Heard you a bunch of times and always just find it really fascinating listening to what you've got to say. So thank you for your service. My question is kind of similar to Rachel's one actually. Just when you mentioned, I can't remember the exact quote, but you mentioned you wrote a meditation on it that God doesn't have will, or there isn't God's will. I just wondered if you could elaborate on that. I found that really interesting. Thanks.
Well, what we do, you're welcome. What we do is we anthropomorphize God, because it's all that we know is what we know, material reality. All we know, because we are finite, is finite reality. And whatever this is that we call God is infinite. Now, even the word infinite's beyond our scope of experience, knowledge, comprehension, because it means no beginning and no end. Now, I can define it. I just don't know what I'm talking about, because I'm finite and I don't have any experience of infinite other than poetically, philosophically, maybe spiritually. And so, I don't believe God has will. And one of the authors out here in the Los Angeles area was Chuck Chamberlain, wrote New Pair of Glasses. If you don't have it, try to get it over there, wherever you are in UK. From your accents, I'm sure you're not in the United States. But it's a New Pair of Glasses. And he says, God is love. Well, now that's another whole discussion. But when we put human nomenclature, human words on God, we put God in a box. And many people do it because it's just an easy way to have a conversation. Even the word God, G-O-D. The word G-O-D is not God. The word G-O-D is a symbol for the reality. Now, this is going to be a phrase that's going to perhaps be a source of meditation. I hope not irritation for most of you. And that is Thomas Merton quoting some old sage. Thomas Merton was a monk himself, died in 1968. He said, God is that reality that has no circumference and whose center is everywhere. I'm going to repeat it because it's brilliant for a meditation and kind of a koan. God is that reality that has no circumference and whose center is everywhere. Now, see, Bill knew that. You read page 53 in the big book. When Bill is asking you to make a faith decision, he says, God is or God isn't. What is your choice? God is everything or God is nothing. What is your choice? We are confronted with the question of faith. See, Bill was a prophet and a mystic by my standards. That phrase itself, he knew more than what is contained in the words that he used. God is or God isn't. What is your choice? We are confronted with the question of faith. Choice. No knowledge, no certitude, no feeling, no emotion. Just a choice. But the rubber meets the road in any level of spirituality or human development when in fact we act as if what we just made a choice about is real. And that's called trust and hope. We hope that the choice we made is not fantasy, that it is in fact real. And so going back to your initial question about God's will, it's a clunky way of talking about living in alignment with reality. I don't believe God has will, coming and going, good and bad. I don't believe in it at all. Reality just is reality and it's manifesting. Reality is a synonym for God, capital R.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks for your question, Isaac.
Thanks for the question, because I'm happy with the recording at this point.
No more hands up, so I'd like to ask you a question, Herb, if I may. You talked about 7 years of silence. How was that?
Quiet. Yeah. Now, we were in college during this training period, ages 17 to 24, so we were talking in class. We had a half an hour after lunch, and we had a half an hour after dinner. And then on the weekends, we would have 1 or 2 hours, depending on pool time, tennis time, that kind of, because they were raising young American adults. But the majority of time was silent. It was the atmosphere, and it was actually the rule. So I loved it. Slightly introverted, not majorly, but slightly. And I enjoyed the solitude, and I enjoyed the camaraderie, and I enjoyed the mission and the training. Obviously, I didn't enjoy it enough to stay, and at age 24, I left. But I still enjoy my solitude. I still enjoy my silence, and but I go to meetings because of my humanity, and I want to stay civilized.
Lovely, thank you. So we've got 4 minutes left and 3 hands up, so we'll get in as many as we can, but please do make your questions short if you can. Kieran, please come on in.
Thanks. I'm just going to go straight to my question. But in each of your go-throughs of the steps, did you experience spiritual experiences?
The answer is yes, and I'm going to answer more than you asked, and that is the difference between a spiritual experience and a spiritual awakening. They're both a change. Appendix 2, it describes it in the way that I understand it, that they're both the same. A spiritual experience and a spiritual awakening are the same in that they're a change. The time frame is different. A spiritual experience is kind of like that sudden, very palpable, visible, visceral kind of experience of the lights have come on, whereas the awakening is a very slow, like I described, 12 years. The answer to your question is yes. During each of the steps, I was changed in the long term without being aware of it. But during the time of the step process, I would have these pops that were absolutely visceral and visible. Yes.
Thank you for your question, Kieran. Sam, come on in.
Hi, thanks everyone for the meeting. I'm Sam, addict. Thanks, Herb. Yeah, you spoke a lot about reality, and you mentioned perfectionism and dysfunction. I think it was kind of in the same sort of sentence. So what I want to ask is, when life shows up and it's hard and it's negative, in my opinion, and it's not going my way, like, how do you manage trying and waiting and being and remaining positive, like in that space of reality when it's tough?
Yeah. It's the perfect question. It's right on the money. Well phrased. Thank you so much. And there's the 3 A's in dealing with reality, especially emotional sobriety. Acknowledge reality. It is what it is 100% of the time. Acknowledge it. Accept it. There's the hard part. It's not my story, and it's not what I wanted. And the 3rd A, adjust. And that's step 10, that course correction. If, in fact, reality is like this, here is reality, and here I am with my free will, I need to be in alignment, because when, in fact, I go out of alignment with reality, I suffer and or will be crushed. Step 10 is to be adjusting my course correction into alignment with reality so that I'm in the flow. It's a perfect question. Thank you so much for asking it.
Thank you so much, Sam. And last up, Robbie, please come on in.
Hi, everyone. Herb, thanks for the share. Got a lot from that. It's amazing. Just wanted to ask quickly, you mentioned near the start that you wrote an autobiography of your relationship with alcohol. And suggested that we try it, and it led to your first awakening. Would you be able to just expand on that a wee bit? Like, how did you go about that? Like, from the start of your life on, or what was the thinking there?
Well, see, it wasn't about my life. It was about my relationship with alcohol. So I wrote about being age 12 and getting a quart of whiskey and a 6-pack of beer and what I did and how I felt and what happened. And then at age 13 and age 15 and age 21 and age 22, 502s, drunk driving arrests, blackouts, passouts, embarrassment. I wrote about my history of my relationship with alcohol, which convinced me that, in fact, I had a problem with alcohol. But it was very focused, and your wonderful question, and it was a key to the beginning, the key of my willingness, but the key of attempting to be honest with myself and then reading it out to somebody else, very, very much like a fifth step.